and little known but pervasive third world diseases, guinea worm disease and river blindness. Yes. Can you talk a little bit about how pervasive those diseases were and why you decided to take aim at them?
Well, guinea worm is in the Bible. It's called the fiery serpent in the Bible. You might remember that, reading about it. And you know, the symbol for a doctor is a staff with two things wrapped around it that most people think are snakes. Those are actually guinea worms. And guinea worm is a horrendous disease. It's caused by drinking impure water out of a stagnant pond. So in most places, in many places in Africa, they just have a pond that fills up during the rainy season. And then they drink the water out of that during the dry season. They don't have any wells and running water. So breeding in those stagnant waters is the guinea worm eggs. And if people drink the water and it has guinea worm eggs in it, a year later they have a guinea worm growing in their body. And they get to be about 30 inches long. And when they get ready to emerge, they sting the epidermis, or the skin, from inside and make a horrible sore that destroys muscle tissue. And the guinea worm emerges from the human body, and it takes about 30 days to come out. And while they're coming out, that's when they're females, and they lay eggs. So if the people don't know what causes the disease, and they wait out in their pond to get more water to drink, then the guinea worms lay hundreds of thousands of eggs, and that keeps it going around. Well, we found out about this in 1985, and nobody wanted to fool with it because it's such a horrible disease, and it's just in isolated villages that don't have any kind of running water or deep wells. And they're scattered all over Africa and in 3 countries in India. So I adopted the total eradication of this disease as our first major health project. We started doing a survey in every country that had guinea worms, starting out in Pakistan, by the way, and also in Yemen and in India and all the way across Sub-Sahara Africa. And we found guinea worms in 23,600 villages. The Carter Center has been in every village. And we had 3.6 million cases of guinea worm. And we began to treat the problem by giving people very fine nets, filter cloths that they could strain the water through. And in some cases, we dug some deep wells, but primarily filter nets. And we've reduced now from 3.6 million. Last year, we had less than 0.1%. We only have 1,600 cases in the whole world. I don't want to take too much time, but river blindness is a most prevalent disease in arid countries of Africa, because when you have a rapid stream that bubbles over rocks like a trout stream, little tiny black flies breed in the water and they sting people. We've done tests on it, the Centers for Disease Control has, and they found that an average young child gets stung 30,000 times a year. The stings are not very painful, but you can feel them. But anyway, they lay eggs inside the body that becomes small worms, and those worms, over a period of about 12 years, travel through the bloodstream and wind up in the eye, and they attack the eye and they cause blindness. It's called river blindness. And what's happened over the centuries is that people move away from those little running streams to get away from the flies, and they move up on the arid, steep hillsides and they move out of the bottomland that's productive. And that's happened all over Africa. So we decided that we would also address that. And luckily, Merck and Company, the CEO of Merck and Company, developed a dog medicine called Heart Guard. Some of you use it. And a Turkish scientist at Merck and Company found that this Heart Guard, which is called ivermectin or mectisan, would also do away with guinea worm micro-worms. And so he came to the Carter Center and said they would give us the medicine free of charge in a few countries if we would deliver it to the people and help control the disease. So later I went to Africa with the CEO of Merck, and we got on television. We were standing on a dam, and his name was Roy Vagelos. And I said, Roy, you give this medicine to us in a few countries now. Would you be willing to give it to us all over the world? And he was on television. And he finally said yes. So last year, the Carter Center treated 11,300,000 people with free medicine from Merck & Company, and none of those people will have river blindness. The problem is, though, that the parent worms that live in sores on your back still breed the tiny little microscopic worms. So we get rid of the microscopic worms, nobody ever goes blind, but we have to do it every year. And so we've started in South America giving the medicine twice or 4 times a year, and now we're in the process of doing away with river blindness in South America, and we're now trying this also in Africa. So it's a major thing for us, but the problem is that you can't send the Merck pills to villages and ask the people to give it to each other, because if you have river blindness, you would rather have this little Mectizan pill than a diamond the same size. So the pills are very valuable if somebody steals them from us and sells them. So we have to go into the villages and deliver the pills directly in the mouth of people. And we train people how to do this. They all work for the Carter Center. So it's a very interesting challenge for us to undertake.
I'm going to ask that the questions that you all wrote out for President Carter be brought to me at the convenience of my staff. But let me go back to, thank you very much. Let me go back to your, just leaving office, Mr. President. Your post-presidency is now considered the most remarkable of any president in American history. But it did not begin particularly auspiciously. No, can you tell us about those first days after office and the questions that you and Mrs. Carter were asking yourselves about your future?
Well, we really didn't know what to do. I was in debt. I didn't make any money when I was in the White House. We spent what we had. And after I was defeated in November of 1980, my representative, who was a blind trustee, came and told me that I was $1 million in debt, that the previous business that I had, that my brother had been running, we had 4 years of drought in Georgia, and Carter's Warehouse, which was our major source of income, was almost in bankruptcy. So I was $1 million in debt. I had to build a presidential library. I didn't know what I was going to do. So luckily, Archer Daniel Midland Company, ADM, decided to go in the peanut business, and they bought my warehouse for enough to pay off the debt. So I didn't have to lose all our farms. So I started out from, you might say, from scratch. And so we began, you already know about the history of the Carter Center. And this was a challenging time for me and Rosen. I was invited to be a college, in fact, I had 2 offers to be presidents of universities. But I wanted to get out of politics. So, and I didn't want to spend the rest of my life raising money, but I found I have to do that now. But anyway, I was also invited to be a professor in the university system of Georgia. They have 33 universities and colleges, and I was supposed to be a university lecturer and go around to different ones and make speeches, but I didn't want to be controlled by the Georgia legislature either. So Emory University president, whose that name at that time was James Laney, invited me to teach at Emory, and they promised me complete freedom of speech and that sort of thing. So I decided to go, and I've been a college professor now. This is my 30th year that I'm finishing. And every month I teach in a different part of the university. In a whole year, I teach in every major department of Emory, in law, in history, political science, theology, religion, English, medicine, and so forth, every one. And so I've done that now for 30 years. And so I've enjoyed that very much. So we've had a very full life in relationships with Emory University teaching and with Rosen's mental health programs and with our Carter Center programs. We had a difficult time the first 2 years in getting the Carter Center started because the Reagan administration was determined not to give us any support. And so sometimes we would arrange to go to a foreign country, and not only would the ambassador leave the country, but the ambassador would also sabotage our whole trip and tell none of his people to even meet with me or Rosen. So we had that problem until George Shultz became Secretary of State, and then it changed. So we had a hard time at first. But we've prevailed, and we've had a wonderful relationship with, particularly with the Centers for Disease Control, which is right next door to us. And so we deal with presidents and kings, and also with ministers of health, ministers of agriculture, and so forth, ministers of finance. And so one of the things that made it possible for the Carter Center to be successful is that I'm still looked upon with respect in foreign countries, particularly poor countries. And so when I go in, I can meet with the president, and if I come to eradicate guinea worm, about which the president has never heard if he hasn't been from a guinea worm village, he doesn't know what I want. And I say, well, why don't you invite your cabinet in, let me tell you, so I can get the president and his whole cabinet to support the Carter Center in our project that we carry out. So that's been the source of our strength and influence. I never have been overseas to a sensitive area without getting permission from the White House, sometimes reluctant, but I've always managed to get permission or either not go. And I always make a written report to the President and the Secretary of State, and usually the Secretary General of the United Nations when I come back from a trip. So when I go to a sensitive area, I like to meet with Hamas or to meet with Syrians or to meet with the North Koreans and so forth. I always give a report to the White House.
Ruby, age 10, asks, what's the funniest thing that happened to you in the White House?
Well, it wasn't funny to me, but it was funny to everybody else. One time when I was on vacation from the White House and went down to Plains, I went fishing in one of our fish ponds. We have 4 fish ponds now. And Rose and I are avid fishers. Now we do fly fishing all over the world, but then we were committed to our farm ponds. And while I was fishing, Jody Powell, my press secretary, was there. He was fishing on the bank, and Rose and I were out in the boat. And a bunch of dogs was chasing a rabbit. How many of you know about this story? Yeah, I see, okay. So the rabbit jumped in the water, and rabbits can swim very well, as can all other wild animals. They have to cross creeks and so forth. But the rabbit swam toward my boat. And I just took my paddle and splashed water on the rabbit, and the rabbit turned and went to the bank. That was all there was to it. Unfortunately, about 2 years later, Jody Powell was with some other people, newspaper. In one of the taverns in Washington, and he embellished his story enormously just to get a local appreciation or maybe a free beer or something. And it was a wild rabbit that tried to attack me in my boat, and I was saved by the skin of my teeth from being bitten, and he thought that the rabbit was probably mad, had rabies. Well, this became the #1 story in the whole world, was that President Carter, who's already beleaguered, he can't get everything he wants, is even afraid of rabbits. So, see, all of you are laughing. I'm not laughing still. And you can't imagine, I probably got, I don't know, I still get about 3,000 letters a week, but I don't know how many letters I got about rabbits. And people wanted to know, they had pet rabbits. If I throw my rabbit in the pond, in my swimming pool, can he swim out? It's things like that. So I had to write people and explain the fortitude and capabilities of rabbits for a long time. So that's one of the funny things that happened that a lot of people remember.
This is known infamously as the killer rabbit story.
Absolutely.
Maybe a cautionary tale about the excess of alcohol. Who's your favorite president?
Well, I can't change my story just because I'm in this library. I've always said my favorite president in my lifetime was Harry Truman. And I can explain that. And that is, I was a submarine officer. I was in the Naval Academy when Franklin Roosevelt died, and Harry Truman became president almost completely unknown.